This little coin saved my life. Why don't we see if it saves yours? Tails, you live, and heads, you don't.
We're already dead.
Now, I'm gonna cover this series both as a Batman show and as a show, which will be challenging because I'm not entirely convinced that it's either. Gotham Knights is the most unenjoyable experience I've ever had with any Batman project ever made. It is the bottom of the bat barrel.
The lowest of the low.
Yeah, the lowest of the low.
If you love Batman, then you'll hate this show. While the show takes place in Gotham City, it's not the Gotham City most fans are used to. This is a Gotham City without Batman, without the Joker, and without Commissioner Gordon. You have a Robin, but she's pretty much a Robin in name only. There's nothing casual fans are familiar with here. The characters and parts of the mythos that are used, only the die-hard Batman fans would understand. These aren't surface-based names. These are some of the more obscure characters within the lore, and even saying that they don't really resemble themselves in any way, shape, or form. It's a show that's made for a fandom that provides nothing for actual fans of the source material. This adaptation offers no fan service, but does a disservice to everything it tries to adapt. People tune into Batman content to see the characters that they know and love. They're always up for being introduced to new good guys and bad guys, but if they're not sharing the screen with already established villains and vigilantes, then what's the point? Unless you're a die-hard Batman fan, you probably won't know most of the characters in the show. And if you are a die-hard Batman fan, then you probably won't recognize any of the characters in the show, as they all seem so off the source. The show doesn't give fans something they're familiar with. Instead of Batman, you get his son. Instead of the Joker, you get his daughter. Instead of the Riddler, you get the Clue Master. Instead of the League of Shadows / Assassins, you get the Court of Owls. Now look, I'm not saying that all of these are ripoffs. Clearly, they're inferior, less popular characters who sort of fit the same mold as some of the major names. This series really doesn't succeed as a Batman series, which is probably because Batman is only used as a backdrop here. Gotham Knights is yet another Batman show without Batman. It wants to coast off the coattails of the Dark Knight, but it doesn't have the permission to actually use him. As idiotic of an idea as that may sound, it's well within good company, as many, if not most, live-action Batman-related shows run into the same problem. Shows like Birds of Prey and Batwoman had to attempt creative workarounds to explain Batman's absence. While Birds of Prey and Batwoman wrote the character off as having gone missing in the course of action, Gotham Knights starts off by immediately killing off Gotham's Knight. The hit was orchestrated by the Court of Owls, who then go on to frame a bunch of D-list crooks and Z-list characters for the crime, making Bruce's adopted son Turner look as if he put out the hit himself. I remember initially when this show was being pitched and promoted, the word was that the lead would be a young Dick Grayson, which would have probably been a smarter option, allowing the audience to get behind and follow a character they're probably already acquainted with. I would guess that since the character was already in use on the show Titans, there might have been a bit of a Robin embargo going on. Perhaps that's also why the character couldn't have been replaced by later Robins, Jason Todd and Tim Drake, because they were also used on that series as well. But why even go the route of giving him a new adopted son? Damian Wayne could have worked in the role. I mean, sure, you would have had to change a few things around, but this show was never going to be the perfect adaptation anyway. Overall, the character feels like what would happen if an NPC became the main character.
As the city's savior, Batman. But to me, he was just my dad.
It wasn't always the case, Kelley. Are you saying she can't change?
And are you willing to bet the whole city on that?
I'm willing to bet on her!
Look, this is the best shot we've ever had at ending all of this. And we have to take it. I'm done being afraid.
This morning I learned that Batman didn't kill my parents. They died because he was defending himself from them.
My dad used to say that every strength is secretly a weakness.
Okay, all due respect to Daddy's bat proverbs, but what the hell does that mean?
The show didn't take its time to carve out or convey the character. It didn't bother giving him any identifiable traits or mannerisms. There's next to no characterization of the show's main character. When trying to flesh out your lead as an afterthought, what was your first thought? What were you even thinking? His only place in the series seems to be to kickstart the plot. And then past that, he's just going with the flow. He's integral to the narrative, but they made no effort in making him interesting. Or, even anything at all. He's just nothingness personified.
You don't know anything about it.
That's the problem.
What I find most strange about Turner, though, is that the show was promoting him as being some sort of Jason Todd type, but in actuality, he's a much more generic Tim Drake. Before the show aired, he was referred to as being Bruce Wayne's rebellious adopted son. That's how he's supposed to be depicted, but you'd never know that from actually watching the show. He's rebellious? How? In what way? Because he once threw a party when his parent wasn't home? Yeah, that's not being rebellious, that's being a teenager. The show sort of insists that Turner has a wild side, but if he does, it's not one that's ever shown.
There must be a relief.
Hey! Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. Relief.
You are no longer required to be this boring. Come on, what happened to that guy that I know you keep tucked away, hiding underneath all that cashmere?
Let me know when he wants to come out and play.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
They're so desperately trying to speak this into existence, but his existence is counterproductive to this narrative. He's about as dangerous as a baby-proofed home. This kid isn't rough around the edges. He doesn't even have an edge to him. He's boring, bland, and basic, which not only doesn't fit the self-appointed mold of this character, but it's also not exactly main character material. But what confuses me further is that not only is Turner not presented the way that he's spoken of, but it sort of seems like they were attempting to write him as a miniature version of his mentor, making him his adopted father's son. But that doesn't make any sense here either, as from a nature standpoint, he doesn't share any of the same genes as his father, and from a nurture standpoint, he didn't know of his father's dual identity. The son of Batman didn't even know his father was Batman. So giving him Batman-like qualities, it just doesn't add up. The math isn't mathing. Granted, they do express that Bruce was subtly teaching him the tricks of the trade, but I don't think that justifies him being a junior Justice Leaguer. While they wouldn't make a Robin a lead, they did instead give this could-have-been Robin two has-been Robins, keeping the sidekicks in supporting roles.
I'm Stephanie. You're Carrie. And we have a lot more in common than that.
Adding the only two girl-boy wonders to his high school entourage. Following his father's death, Turner is guided by Batman's sole sidekick, and the series' Robin, Carrie Kelley.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Robin.
So you knew my dad was Batman.
Called me his little Robin.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
You'd be forgiven for not recognizing her, as she owns nothing Robin-related. This gear is unlike anything we've ever seen before, and it's just so basic and bland and generic. Feels like a major step backwards in terms of attires through adaptations. When shows like Titan can use the iconic looks and can pull them off without making them look like bad cosplay, what's Gotham Knights' excuse? Why is it giving characters the Smallville treatment in terms of costumes? It's just so bad and it feels incredibly outdated. But then again, when your Batman allegedly wears this, then maybe I'm at fault for expecting effort. In terms of Robin's actual characterization, this sort of feels like the character. It's a vague but valid version of that vigilante. To be fair, it's not like her character was ever deeply fleshed out within the comics. She was pretty much just the perfect sidekick and junior detective. The second coming of Dick Grayson. A total Boy Scout, just minus the boy. She meant well, she did good, and that really was all there was to it. This character feels in line with that brief description, but it doesn't do anything else to expand on it. Sure, she has similar traits as her panel-to-panel predecessor, but in the transition between mediums, she loses the character's unique backstory. In the comics, Carrie Kelley comes from a pretty neglectful home originally. It made her decision to break away and fight to save others highlight her absolute selfless mentality, trying to give more back to the world than was ever given to her. While here, she comes from a very loving home with a mother who cares about her quite a bit. So I think a little bit of what made the character special does get lost in translation, and this Carrie Kelley doesn't exactly have the same effect as the other. The performance is good, but it feels a little bit out of place. She's putting in good work if this was a Disney Channel show, which it is not. And upon further investigation, that makes a lot of sense because she has a lot of experience being on Disney shows.
Harry. We have a trip together?
Right. What are you doing here?
Responding to a burglary in progress? Know anything about that?
Your father may have been a hero to all of Gotham, but he always used to tell me that his hero was you. If I could, I think he'd say the good guys aren't the ones you should be fighting, Mom.
You okay?
I'm great.
Then I assume there's someone somewhere who's not great?
Yep, guy about the size of a refrigerator.
Turner's best bud, Stephanie Brown, who is an expert hacker, does her best to try to clear a friend's name. Her friendship with Turner does make me feel like he is in fact a discount Robin, considering her long-standing sometimes friendship, sometimes relationship with Tim Drake.
He used his dad's back computer to try to prove he was innocent.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to figure out which part of that sounds more insane.
I know two things. Turner is innocent. And if you had any proof against me, I'd be in handcuffs right now. And I know not to say anything else without an attorney. Sorry, that was 3 things. GCPD captures mutant gang leader. The press always gets it wrong.
Even if they got a lot of her origin right, I still feel like they got this character wrong. Most of her alleged character arc surrounds her smarts, but the major issue is that that role's already filled by Harper Row, one of Turner's other alleged accomplices. Harper's a street-smart kid with smart smarts. Good in any situation. I understand that the comparison is made within the show. While it also contrasts their upbringings and makes for an interesting dynamic, it also does mean that a lot of their dialogue and problem solving is basically interchangeable, and so is their role in the team.
Look, it just seems like you two are a lot alike. You're both literal geniuses, incredibly stubborn.
Harper doesn't really play a bigger role than that, nor does her brother Cullen. They seem to be the main characters plus ones in the show. A lot of their dialogue in the earlier episodes revolve around their relationship and their rough upbringing. The two trade off the role of overprotective sibling, with them seemingly learning the same lesson by the end of every episode. How many more times are you going to learn to loosen your grip? To learn to look out for your sibling but not smother them? The character who makes the biggest impression out of Gotham Knights, however, isn't Spoiler, the Rose, or Batman's son, but instead the Joker's daughter.
You know, your pops killed mine.
Well, I would sooner send your dad a thank you note than send him flying out a window.
We don't have cheerleaders at this school.
Well, they're lost because you are rocking that skirt, Blondie.
A yearbook for serial killers.
Superlatives include best strangling technique.
Duela is every bit as deranged as you'd imagine. She comes off as a miniature Alice from Batwoman, or a younger, girlier version of her potential father. She's recklessly unpredictable, and gets the team in trouble more often than she gets them out of it. Despite being the Gotham Knights' one redeeming and entertaining character, a lot of the time she's given the B-plots and made to make comments from the background. It isn't until the end of the season that her character starts to play more of a role, when she starts seeing Turner, which makes the show feel like really, really bad fanfiction. Batman's son and the Joker's daughter makeout sesh? Yeah, no thanks. Then there's that other big reveal, but we'll get there in a minute. The character is definitely better adjusted and toned down to fit in with the tone of the series, but she still feels true to the villainess that she's portraying. While she may not have a whole lot of competition in this front, she is still by far my favorite Duela. And it's a real shame that this is where she was chosen to play the part, because she plays it well, but she's one of the few things that are done well in the whole show. Equally unfortunate in that right is this show's Harvey Dent. Misha Collins is quite frankly one of, or possibly even the greatest Harvey Dent that we've ever gotten. I'm not kidding, this guy's the total package. I would have never thought to cast him as Two-Face, but I would have thought wrong. That even makes sense? He carries himself with confidence and comes off as effortlessly charming. However, he still comes off as very human, because it's clear that his charisma is just a front. He's unsettled and anxious at all times. He may act like he has it all figured out, but that couldn't be any further from the truth, as his issues from deep down make their way to the forefront. Getting to watch him share the screen with his other half was a real treat. I thought the show did a good job of showcasing Harvey's split personality. Because the truth of the matter is that Harvey's darker half isn't born out of evil. It's born out of a sense of better protection that can often unfortunately blind him and get him to do evil things.
You know, when our daughter shot me.
Hiya, Harv. It's me. You. The other you.
Everyone talks to themselves, Harv. The difference here is that the other selves don't usually talk back.
You wanted to talk? I'm here. Gotta say, I was 60-40 on whether you would overdose on a dare from an alter ego.
This little coin saved my life. Why don't we see if it saves yours?
While I'm a fan of the performance in spite of the project that it's a part of, I will also willingly admit that his Two-Face does sound a little bit like Heath Ledger's Joker.
You gave her this whole song and dance about what a monster I was. Cha-ching! You just sell her to the highest bidder.
Even to a guy like me, that's cold.
His season-long arc is highly entertaining, and if you isolate just his moments and his story beats from the show, there's truly something special here. But everything else surrounding it is just so painstakingly painful. So spoiler alert here, they don't call him Handsome Harvey for nothing. This guy's getting around. And I mean really, really getting around. That seems like a strange thing for me to note, but it's actually a plot point. He's out here sleeping with Lincoln March's wife, and it's later revealed that his alter had slept with Arkham inmate Jane Doe and the two-father Duela Dent. That's right, the Joker's daughter isn't actually the Joker's daughter at all. She's in fact Two-Face's kid. And as for as ridiculously contrived as that may sound, it is nothing compared to how complicated and overly complex her story is in the actual comics. It's also not 100% clear either for the most part, but we'll just move past it. Duela's mother, Jane Doe, is also considerably different than she is in the comics. In the comics, she's a cold-blooded serial killer who murders her victims before assuming their identity. She's driven by a need to become those that she kills. And while that is lightly referenced here, it's certainly not a fixture of this villain at all. While both the characters from the comics and the show are psychotic, their psychosis differs. The Jane Doe from the show is less cold and calculating and much more unruly and dysfunctional, rather than being ruled by a psychological need to continue what she ends. She's just driven by greed and a lack of loyalty. While this iteration isn't ideal as an accurate adaptation of the character, it is a rendition that works for this retelling of the tale. She may not be the perfect Jane Doe, but she is the perfect parent for Duela. You can certainly see a blueprint for who she'd become when looking at who her mother was. There are definitely traces of her predecessor in her personality. The Court of Owls are of course the show's big bad. And while they make for a good Season 1 antagonist in concept, in execution the whole thing just comes off as a little bit silly from time to time. Their plans aren't nearly as bulletproof as they should be. Often they let a group of untrained teens out of their sights and they're just continually bested by this newly formed, underestablished, untrained group. The show keeps them in this weird state where they're intimidating and omnipresent, but only when they need to be. When it doesn't benefit the plot, they're oblivious and oafish whenever our teen team needs to make a perfect getaway. The constant cycle of, gotcha, you fell for my trap, just convolutes the whole ordeal and makes it all unwatchable. It's not that it's impossible to follow, but it's impossible to care about. The amount of backstabbing and just overall deception with the court just makes the whole angle feel really ridiculous. Not to mention their masks, I mean, come on. This is glorified arts and crafts, just not glorified. The masks are amateur hour. They're pretty cheap looking for a cult of billionaires. But what I hate the most about them, outside of just how awful they look, is the fact that these masks do so little to actually hide their wearers' identities. It's pretty obvious who these people are underneath these dollar store masks. And when some of these people are meant to be big reveals, you would think that more effort would be put in here. The Marches are revealed to be the figureheads of the Court of Owls. Well, more so Mrs. March than Mr., who is also in fact revealed to be Dr. Leviticus, who, quite frankly, is a character so obscure that even I had to look her up. And if I need to Google search your Batman villain, I think that's really saying something about their popularity or lack thereof. She's lived for centuries, and she wants her revenge / power / Harvey Dent.
You're gonna make me beg, aren't you?
I don't know, while she makes her a fine villain in her own right, her plan for power just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as a lot of it includes killing her underlings and family members just cuz. I think she loses a lot of credibility when she basically ditches her whole plan in order to try to run away with Harvey. It comes off as comically inept. She's so enamored with Gotham's DA that she forces him to go rogue and end up being her new boy toy. What a way to discredit your main villain. In the last couple episodes of the show, they just make her a love-struck immortal. But in the season finale, Big Bad Harv betrays the show's Big Bad, leading her to scar his face and turn this man with two identities into Two-Face. The whole season surrounds the court and their control over Gotham City. They're the show's Big Bad, and any additional villains are typically either associates of the Owls or pawns in their plans. And yet, when the season ends, they're not taken out by the Gotham Knights, but instead by a new threat. The show's main antagonists are offed not by the main protagonists, but a replacement threat for a following season. A following season in a series that's not getting a following season. The strangest case of the series, though, has to be Brody March, who starts off as a series' social antagonist, but slowly ends up in the hero role. He's a bit of a dick, but then he finds out that his parents are some sort of ultimate evil of Gotham City, at which point he gets murdered by his mother, brought back to life by his father, and decides to fight against them. That's his whole story. And like our lead, he's very undescriptive. Even by the end of the show, I have no idea what this character was meant to be. I don't mean to discredit any of the actors, because these parts are very well cast, but I don't think that they're necessarily well written. There's nothing wrong with the acting for the most part. I actually happen to think the cast is quite talented. I just wish the material that they were working with was as acceptable. And that's the main cast. But they're far from the only Batman characters that make up the cast, though they're really the only ones most people would know. But even that statement might be pushing it. Dr. Chase Meridian, a character originally made for the movie Batman Forever, makes her second on-screen appearance here. They also have a very chilling Joe Chill. Pun intended, but the point still stands. The greatest part of this show is the little nods they make to the actual mythos. I really enjoyed being able to point out these references. A lot of them are actually pretty subtle and kinda clever, but that shouldn't be the highlight and takeaway from an entire season of a show. This is a narrative, not an Easter egg hunt. The cast has no chemistry within their ranks. Like, I could buy some of these friendships, but I can't buy any of these relationships. I don't buy the wild child hooking up with the son with a silver spoon. They wouldn't necessarily seem like each other's types, and that's fine, because sometimes opposites attract, and often that leads to good stories. This isn't one of them. When they're finally paired together, it's not exactly like sparks are flying. Just as bad as Harper and Stephanie, who go from constantly clashing heads to suddenly smacking lips. Harper spends most of the season jealous of Stephanie, and then spends the last part of the season jealous of anyone who comes in contact with her. Which doesn't sound like the beginning of a healthy relationship. True, Harper defended Stephanie from her mother when the time came, but she was also only there on location because she was gonna snuff Stephanie out if need be. The two bonded and flirted before, and Harper didn't hesitate to turn her emotions off and turn on Stephanie. So who's to say it wouldn't happen again relatively soon? These two aren't any less unstable than Duela and Turner, but the show seems less aware of the dysfunction in this duo. Not like any of it matters, because both fall flat and are very over-romanticized.
So that's what you think.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
I mentioned the romance between Batman's son, who isn't really Batman's son, and Joker's daughter, who isn't really Joker's daughter, and how it comes off as bad fanfiction. And I wasn't lying. But that feeling doesn't stop there either. The twists and turns that this show takes are almost always an issue. Turner's parents being career criminals that Batman accidentally killed, Joe Chill being set up to take the fall for the Court of Owls, the court's leader betraying the court in favor of being Harvey Dent's girlfriend. It's just all so bad. I do want to credit them with at least trying something new and doing something different, but being different isn't enough. You have to make sure what you're doing differently, you're doing good. I mean, you defied my expectations, but so would squatting down and taking The Last Jedi over a glass table. The most unforgivable part of this series, however, is that this subpar season sets up a better second season that the show will now never see. Look, I'm not crying over the aspect of never having to sit through another one of these episodes by any means. More than likely, I will never visit these episodes again. But let's not act like business wasn't starting to pick up there. The series ended with the Court of Owls being defeated, Two-Face being created, Turner being assumed dead, and then being taken in by the man who trained his parents and his adoptive father, Henry Ducard. The court's been unearthed, the world knows about the Gotham Knights. All of that sounds like a way better show than any of what we got this season. Why couldn't this have been that? I would have much rather that than this. As I said before, this doesn't succeed as a Batman show, but I also find that it ultimately doesn't succeed as its own original series either. The show's tone is constantly at war with itself. It wants to present itself as a Batman story with the way that it's shot and colored. It has this dark, almost cinematic feel to it. I actually happen to really enjoy both the camera work and camera quality. But the story it surrounds is just not one worth watching. The severity of the situations the characters find themselves in is often put on the back burner in favor of needless in-group gossip, team turmoil, and love triangles. Boy, does this show love love triangles. Or, at the very least, teasing one. Or 6. I wish that was me being hyperbolic, but it's really not. At the end of the day, it feels like Gotham City is just a setting for this heightened high school drama. It's not terribly done, but it's painful to sit through. You don't expect to go into a Batman show and get Degrassi the Next Generation. Like, there's definitely an audience for that, but why are you promoting it to this one instead? I've said it before when I attempted to break down the series on an episodic basis, but this show was pretty much just Diet Riverdale. But after witnessing all this show had to offer, I'm gonna take that back. This is Diet Riverdale in a big ol' bowl of Smallville oops all stupid. What I mean by this is that this series sort of, whether intentional or not, and probably it's not, borrows all the poorly done, poorly aged aspects of the show Smallville, but doesn't succeed or even bother in trying to replicate any of the good qualities. Crappy costume design for the core characters? Check. Occasionally cheesy dialogue that takes itself too seriously? Check. Solid stories with character development? Nowhere to be seen. The show is shot as if it's a Batman story, but it doesn't treat the material as if it were a Batman story. While the color palette is dark, the tone and nature of the series is relatively light. Don't get me wrong, they deal with some pretty heavy issues on the show. The whole series is framed around the main character being framed for murder, and the episode's runtimes often come with a body count. But these severe situations and major moments are significantly dulled down by how dopey it is in depiction. In execution, it's just really, really goofy. Despite the high stakes, a lot of what they do is inconsequential. Big moments are skipped past, superficial moments are made the focal point of episodes, relationships aren't always constructed. Sometimes it feels more like they're insisted upon. And a lot of the emotional moments fall short of the mark, which is probably due to the constant clashes in tone. I don't want to harp on this too much, but it's weird that in a show that includes violent stabbing, shootings, and beheadings, that the majority of the focus is put on who's hooking up with who. It's just a bit strange. It feels incredibly misguided. And I want to make it clear, this isn't impossible to pull off. Shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Smallville incorporated and contrasted real-life everyday issues with the otherworldly or supernatural. These shows succeeded because they actually integrated them into the plot, rather than have these elements exist independently of the main story. Side note, if you're watching the full video and don't just listen to the first 9 minutes of it and then skip to the end to repeat the phrase I leave, like my analytics are telling me that a lot of you do, put a 31 in the comments. The story beats in the show feel really repetitive and overly recycled. It's like everyone had their backstories copy and pasted. Everyone's parents are loveless lunatics and heartless monsters. Turner learns that his parents were killers. Brody learns that his parents are responsible for everything bad in Gotham City. Stephanie's parents are self-involved narcissists that put their own reputation before their daughter's needs. Duela's mother literally pawns her off for a profit. Harper and Cullen's father was hateful and homophobic. and couldn't accept his children for who they were. None of the main characters maintain a healthy relationship with their parents, except for the one character who actually didn't have a healthy relationship with their parents in the actual comics. And when it comes to the leads, the show does a really poor job of juggling them all. Characters often get pushed to the background, even the leading lads and ladies. The show is totally unpredictable. But that's not because of how outrageous or well written it is. It's because it seems randomly strung together. Relationships change in a moment's notice. Sometimes they're not even explained or explained away. They just are or they aren't. Feelings come and go. And sure, if that was a commentary on what relationships are like when you're young, well done. But in actuality, it just comes off like they didn't have anything concrete here. Before I get into this next part of the video, I need to emphasize that I'm not a political person. As a matter of fact, I'm an apolitical person.
Disclaimer!
So when I speak here, I'm speaking strictly on the creative side of things, not taking some sort of stance. There will be plenty of people who claim that this show sucks because it's woke. I mean, 2 of the leads are gay, 1 of them is trans, so that's all the fuel a certain section of the internet needs to proclaim this is bad. And with all due respect, that take is bad, for several reasons. First and foremost, I can tell you as a writer, not an accomplished one, but an attempted one at best, the writing process works a lot better when you have a more diverse cast. I'm not saying that every show should check all their social justice boxes or anything like that. This is not me saying that casting directors should act as a modern Noah and get 2 of everyone on board. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that it's much better to have a set of characters that are distinct and identifiable rather than the same interchangeable characters just with different faces. Speaking strictly in the name of storytelling, I think diversity makes for much more compelling stories. But my major issue here is that the show didn't think past those differences. They went out of their way to make sure that they had LGBTQ representation. By the end of the show, I barely know anything about Cullen outside of the fact that he's a trans dude with an overprotective sister. And that annoys the crap out of me because Cullen was always on the cusp of being interesting. He just never quite made it all the way there. His charisma far outweighed Turner's, but he only got half of the screen time, and not even an eighth of the purpose. As a matter of fact, I would go on record as saying I think that Cullen would have been a better lead. All he gets this season is this one brief plot that sees him going incognito and disguising himself as GCPD. During this time, he gets found out, but makes a friend in the department. The two have a couple fun scenes together, and even share a hug to close the series off. But it just means nothing. I mean, it was almost something, but not enough time was devoted to this arc. Their friendship happens in the background in passing. And that's the biggest plot that Cullen gets all season. Which is a shame because he's far more interesting of a character than Turner. He has an interesting backstory, and he is by far the best at banter. He's the one character that had jokes that landed all season. The few times I wasn't laughing at the show, I was laughing with this character.
They got most wanted. Wanted most.
Take them both.
Get what you were after?
Absolutely.
And do I want to know what you intend to use that for?
Yeah, absolutely not. Well, you know, if you victimize the victimizer, then it's a victimless crime.
But this character ultimately amounts to very, very little. And his sister didn't fare too much better. Harper truly comes off as insufferable throughout the whole show. She's constantly spewing really annoying SJW talking points, and it's like, listen, I know there's some truth in what you're saying, but your cadence and delivery is dog shit.
And if I just had a celebrity dad and a multi-million-dollar trust fund, we could be twinsies.
We're paying it back.
Right. Just as soon as the store pays back all the child labor they exploited to make this stuff.
I am just as smart and just as capable as her. But she got born into a better zip code and has everything I ever wanted.
She doesn't exist to make you feel bad. Her life definitely isn't perfect.
Yeah, right.
Don't judge her the way others judge us.
Now granted, while I roll my eyes when she speaks, I do know several people like this in real life, so, you know, it's a valid depiction. It's realistic, there are people out there like that. I think too many times she kind of trails off into self-parody, and I don't get the feeling that that was the intention of those writing the show. While it's good for realism, it's not great for entertainment. It feels like she's constantly victimizing herself, and sometimes creating problems where there really shouldn't be any. Though to be fair, the show does acknowledge that she's running on emotion based on her past and her own upbringing, even being called out by her own brother for that. But I think this just ultimately made the character hard to like. which is unfortunate because the actress handles the material about as good as you could handle this material. Again, I think this is yet another case where the problem falls on poor writing. But back on the subject of wokeness, I think usually that's a really blanket statement to say that. If the show has a female lead, or there's a gay dude in the background, or an additional black character, that's just what it gets called. And I think there's a real problem with just saying that. Using this phrase kind of discredits any actual critiques. And believe me, when it comes to this show, there's plenty to critique and criticize. This show doesn't suck because it's woke. It sucks because it sucks. It wasn't well thought out, well written, or well, it's just all around bad. Problem here is when you write characters and only focus on the problems that these people face, you're not allowing an audience to become sympathetic to their plight. You can't just show problems, you have to show the people who face these problems. You get a completely different reaction from saying something compared to showing something. If you're just talking about an issue, instead of showing how this issue affects the people with the issue, then it doesn't mean as much. Write a person, write a personality before you attach or assign a problem to them. I hate talking about these specific stories because A, I'm not affected, and B, I don't want to be misinterpreted. So if I haven't properly articulated myself well enough yet, for me, and this is just my opinion, I think good representation is much more important than just representation. Again, take it for what it's worth. In my case, absolutely nothing. So when did this show die? In concept. This was a creative abortion. This show was dead on arrival. No matter who was cast in what part, there was no breathing life back into the series. It was creatively bankrupt in blueprint. When I watch this professionally made Warner Brothers distributed Batman-related project that's just so awful in concept, so amateurish in execution, and so soulless in story, it's hard for me not to think of all the unlicensed, unauthorized Batman fan films that treat the character and the world surrounding this character with the utmost love and respect. Films that are fan-funded, that have better props, better costumes, better characters, better character development, and most importantly, a better understanding of what it is that Batman fans love. It's hard not to be disappointed with this show. It's even harder to understand who this show was supposed to be for. The younger demographic that this show was trying to pander to knew better. They could see through this soulless, brainless cash grab from a mile away. The core fan base that they could have profited off of were alienated away from the project due to their poor depiction of the source material. And the casual fans stayed away because they didn't recognize the world that they were setting up or the characters that they were utilizing. Who was this supposed to appeal to? This show was created by the creators of the Batwoman show. And it's almost as if it was created out of a need to up the ante. As if the showrunners heard all the negative things that were said about that previous series and decided, oh, you thought that was bad? I'll show you bad. The show never connected with audiences, and numbers reflected that. Viewership dropped on an episodic basis. Reviews were very unkind, and the show was cancelled following its first season. The series was touted as being the cheapest show the CW ever put together. And boy did it show. But it was also, in addition, the least profitable hero show the CW ever put together as well. So I guess you get what you pay for. I think a story set in the aftermath of the Caped Crusader could be quite captivating. I've personally always wanted to see what a post-Batman Gotham City could look like. But this, well, simply put, this wasn't it. I don't know anyone that likes this series. And I don't know that this series really gave anybody anything to like. So if you dislike the show and like this video, and would maybe be up for a deep dive into this show's Harvey or Duela Dent, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
"Disaster for Gotham City. I am vengeance. I am the Knight, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out."
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.
Goodbye, Gotham City.